Welcome. My name is Alexander, and this is Chants of Sennaar, a new point-and-click adventure I found out about via a zero punctuation video. Since I'm still hunting for other games with the same energy as Heaven's Vault, I decided to give it a shot. Given the nature of the puzzles in the game, I'll try not to give too much away with the footage I use in the video, but no promises. Possible spoilers ahead. We begin as a mystery visitor to a giant tower city, but it quickly becomes obvious that we can't understand the language spoken. But we have a notebook, and as we explore the complex, we deduce the meanings of the language's glyphs. We're also as good at sketching as the protagonist of Season A Letter to the Future, and translations are mainly achieved by matching glyphs to images. Glyphs can only be solved in groups of 3 or more, so you really have to put in the effort to at least narrow down the possibilities. If you have a big backlog of glyphs, it'd take days to trial and error all the combinations. This, on reflection, is what I really wanted from the scrapbooking mechanic in Season. And then, just to step it up even further, you have to, well, step up to a higher level of the complex, which is inhabited by an entire distinct culture with a different language. Now you need to translate it the same way, and then you have to do it again, and then again, and then again, exploring themed environments as you do in Myst or Siberia. Using previous languages as a comparison becomes a new avenue of translation. And it won't always be a perfect one-to-one match. The alchemists have a glyph that means formula, for example, but the more mysticism-influenced devotees' closest equivalent means potion. The glyphs are more abstract than Heaven's Vault's ancient language, so you have to rely on context clues more than symbolism. I assumed for a while that this glyph meant fire, but it turned out to mean theater, two things you do not want to conflate. It pays off to type in your best guess on new glyphs so you can test your theories without memorizing them. Then the game goes even further by making the syntax and grammar for each language different. For extra variety, the game switches occasionally to logic puzzles to clear your path, searches for things like keys, a maze here and there, and because the main character visibly doesn't fit in with any of the cultures, sneaking past guards. The implication that you're getting captured or even killed if you get spotted seems a little harsh. Failing doesn't set you too far back. The game auto-saves, and if you're lucky, it'll only take you part way back through the sequence. While the stealth sections were an interesting change of pace at first, by the end of the game they'd grown complicated enough to feel like work. I'd have preferred more disguise puzzles like in the warrior level, or using the linguistics to find passwords. The weirdest part is between the bard and alchemist levels, where you have to evade a monster. Look at this thing, it looks like a flaming xenomorph. And as far as I can tell, there's no indication of what it is or how it came to be there. The structure we're exploring is pretty obviously based on the Tower of Babel, but at a glance, the biblical tower was the centerpiece of a city. This tower is the city. When I was a kid, I played Civilization 3 a lot, and in the opening cinematic there's another Tower of Babel structure being built, but as we go higher, the building gets more advanced, from mud brick to keystone archways to glass and steel, and Chants of Sennaar feels like it takes place on and inside that thing. We only briefly get any glimpse of the outside world, and it isn't very defined. Granted, the whole game world isn't all that defined. It looks like a moving newspaper comic. The shapes are simple, the colors are flat and bright, and I swear I can even see the print lines in some screens. That's not a bad thing, if anything it's charming. Although I couldn't quite get past how the water on the bard level looks like... well, you know what it looks like. The design makes up for detail with sheer imagination, though. Devotee men and women both wear clothing that look like burqas or chadors, but the elaborate hats remind me vaguely of Tibetan monks, and the architecture is much more evocative of a cathedral. The warriors' helmets remind me of the movie The Fall, which, as it happens, showcases architecture that would fit perfectly in this game, while their weapons look like something out of The Lord of the Rings. The bards all appear to be people of color and look like Greco-Roman actors who are permanently in character. The alchemists have installed machinery all over their level that looks right out of Myst. Throughout the different levels, you encounter these transmission and teleport stations set into stonework, indicating early that the overall structure is more advanced than it looks, and by coincidence, unsettlingly like it was built by the Necrons. This culminates at the top level with an environment evoking a castle, a Borg cube, and a scene from Tron, inhabited by what look like esports gamers in Japanese no masks. It speaks to a theme of alienation and incompleteness, with spiritual, martial, artistic, scientific, and technological values being split apart, to the point that some factions' names for each other are less than flattering. Given the density of the environments, I was pleasantly surprised that I very seldom got lost. Even when I did, it wasn't a slog trying to find what I was looking for, or at least get back to someplace familiar. So the environment design is doing something right. While the game lacks the character depth I loved about Heaven's Vault, you can discern so little about the protagonist, or most anyone else, that there's plenty of scope to project onto them. Mostly. There's a little background late in the game which I found spoiled that a little. I did notice that the only other character who looks much like the protagonist is a child, so I wonder if they're meant to be young. Overall, the mechanics are maybe even better than Heaven's Vault. On the other hand, Chants of Sennaar is a little weaker in world building. Every level seems to have food supplies, but few indications of where they're coming from. At first I assumed that the devotees grew all the food, but the different cultures are so separated that I don't know how they'd send it anywhere. For that matter, the alchemists are mining metal ore from inside the tower somehow. That said, when I played the game through a second time to record, I did start to notice a lot more hints at deeper history. It was pretty clear that the warriors, at least, colonized their part of the tower long after it was built. When you find their treasury, it indicates a Viking-coded heritage. And I found it interesting how it's them, rather than the alchemists or devotees, who seem very invested in astronomy. I also didn't realize the first time that the bards have a class divide, with servants wearing masks that symbolize stupidity. I otherwise found everyone wearing masks strangely cute. Maybe it's because it's clearly for cultural and graphical rather than for COVID reasons. I enjoy the presence of animals. They make the environments more real and, well, lively. However, there are cats in the devotee level, and you can only pet the first one you encounter, an inexcusable oversight. In Heaven's Vault, the ancient language as written has become totally disconnected from the spoken version in a realistic way. Much less realistic here is how we're getting the written glyphs from people talking to us. And if an interaction ends with a character leaving the area, they leave behind this spectral D20 through which you can replay the conversation to study it for clues. I do think it's funny how they just make generalized speech noises to accompany the glyphs.
Hey, you. Hail.
I can't imagine how you direct voice actors to record these. The translation mechanic pays off late in the game when you can start translating attempted communications between different levels, and it creates these really heartwarming moments where you've helped reconnect people and break down misconceptions. Sort of reminds me of some of my favorite moments in Star Trek.
We're human beings with the blood of a million savage years on our hands. But we can stop it.
And if you use the teleporter to nip back into those levels, you start seeing the different factions socializing and sharing their culture. Sad that it'd never be this easy in real life. Although the game does imply there's more work to be done. On my second playthrough, I realized that the devotees specifically invited the bard's servant class to come stay with them. Afterward, you see several people back up at the bard level despairing that they're out of wine or their fans have stopped working. Serves them right. Honestly, that would have been more than enough for me, but... well, I don't want to spoil the ending, but it turns out there might be a reason why all the different cultures in the tower got so cut off. I'm not sure I get it, although the force apparently behind everything also evokes certain episodes of Star Trek. I'll tell you this much. When you get to the top of the tower, you activate this glowing device, but it fizzles out, and it tells you the end. It isn't. I gathered the game had more than one ending, so at first I thought I'd just gotten a less than perfect one and maybe triggered a New Game Plus mode, but it turned out something far more sinister was going on. So don't turn the game off at that point like I nearly did. Chants of Sennaar is exactly the kind of game I was looking for. It's definitely Heaven's Vault light. There's a couple of gameplay elements that seem out of place, and it lacks the depth of characterization, but the environments are varied and imaginative, and the puzzles are almost perfect as far as I can see. Well, except for this one, but it involves math, so it was a lost cause for me anyway. The music is pleasant without being intrusive, and the theme of reunification and dialogue is really touching. Theoretically, you can complete the game without translating every single glyph. That, all the nooks and crannies of the different levels, the relative shortness of the game, and the warm feelings of getting it right should give it replay potential. I certainly expect to play more of it. For now, though, thank you for watching.